Most people have a picture in their mind of what it looks like to finally break free from binge eating, to finally feel in control around food. A moment where it clicks, a switch that flips, a day where food just stops being a problem. Today, I'm going to talk about what it actually looks like because the real version is usually different than that picture. And in a lot of ways, it's even more hopeful. Welcome to Binge Eating Breakthrough, the podcast to help you stop feeling out of control around food and build trust with your body. If you've tried everything but still feel stuck, you're not alone. I've been there too. I'm Jane Pilger, and I'm here to help you see binge eating in a new way so you can finally break free. Each week, you'll get the tools and insights to create peace with food and your body. Your breakthrough starts now. Hello, trusted listener. I consider you a trusted listener because I trust that you have been in this long enough to know that this journey to food freedom, this journey with food is not simple. I trust that you've tried things that didn't work, that you've had moments of real progress, followed by moments that felt like setbacks, and that you're still here, still listening, still willing to consider that something different is possible. And that persistence matters more than you realize. So today, I'm going to answer a question that really doesn't get answered nearly enough in this space. And this is the question: what does breaking free from binge eating actually look like? What does it look like to become a peaceful eater? Not the version on a before and after post on social media. Not the story that starts with struggle and ends neatly with freedom. The real version, with all of its phases and detours and the little shifts that happen long before the behavior actually changes. So I'm talking about this today because I recently received a message from someone inside Cultivate, my group coaching program, who is doing incredibly meaningful work. She told me that stopping restriction had clearly reduced her binging, and that breaking the restriction binge cycle had made a really big difference. But because she was still overeating fairly frequently and was no longer compensating with restriction, she could see her weight going up. But at the same time, she was noticing really positive changes: more energy, better performance at the gym, running and swimming, feeling, in her own words, more stable and content. And so she wanted to know, if it makes sense, she said, whether there are phases that people often go through in recovery. Because she felt so much better in some ways, and she was still really struggling in others, and she didn't know if that meant she was doing it right or if something was wrong. And I didn't have a podcast episode or a resource to point her to, so I told her that I would make something. So this episode is for her, and it's for everyone who has ever been in that in-between place and needed someone to tell them what it means. And to paint a picture, what does it look like to break free from this struggle, from this battle that I have been in for years or decades or what feels like my entire life? So that's what we're going to do today. But first, before we talk about what the journey actually looks like, I want to be really specific about what it is not. Because so much of the suffering in this process comes from measuring real progress against an imagined version of how it's supposed to go. So let me be clear. Breaking free is not a switch that flips. It is not a single insight, a single session, a single moment of clarity that just changes everything overnight. Now, that moment may exist. You might have a conversation or read something or hear something on this podcast or experience something in your life that shifts your perspective in a real, lasting, and meaningful way. But the actual long-term behavior change, the rewiring of the neural networks, that happens after. It happens in the repetition. It happens over time. And it is not linear. You will have stretches where things feel genuinely easier, followed by stretches where the pull toward old patterns is strong again. And this is not a sign that you have lost what you gained. It's a sign that you're human and that your nervous system responds to stress in the patterns that it knows. And the work is not finished yet. And it is not measurable the way that a diet is measurable. The progress doesn't show up on a scale or in an app or in a before and after photo. The binge that you didn't have, the moment that you paused before acting on an urge, the morning after that felt different than it used to, all of those things are real. They are evidence that something is changing. But they don't show up in the places that we've been trained to look. And a brain that has spent years or decades reading the measurable results of dieting doesn't always know how to locate evidence it can't quantify. Rewiring neural pathways takes time. The old patterns will feel easier for longer than you want them to. This isn't failure, though. It's just how change works in a brain and in a nervous system. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I want to offer you something that I think is missing in most conversations about recovery, about becoming a more peaceful eater, about overcoming the struggle with food. Now, this is a little bit of a map of what the journey often looks like, but I want to be really clear. This is not a timeline. This is not a prescription. This is not stages that you move through in order and you complete. I'm going to give you some phases, some kind of recognizable places that you might find yourself in the journey. Now, you may be in more than one at the same time. You may revisit phases that you thought you had moved through. So the goal isn't to be like, okay, I'm in this phase now, I want to graduate out. The goal is to just see yourself on the map and know that wherever you are, it makes sense. So I'm going to go through the various phases that you might find yourself. And as I do, I want you to listen for, where do I see myself? And you might say, yes, I see myself there. Or, oh, actually, I see myself there. So if you find yourself in several of these phases at once, that's totally normal. And you might, as you're listening to this, you might think, I might actually have completed more phases or be even farther than I even realized. Okay, so this is the goal, is to just outline some of these phases for you. So let's start with autopilot. Now, most people begin here, even if they don't recognize it as a starting place. You know that something feels out of control with food. You know that maybe you know that you binge, or just that you eat in ways you don't understand and you can't seem to stop. But often that's all you know. The why? It's pretty vague. The what happens right before? Not so sure. It just happens. And then you feel terrible and you don't like it. You hate it. You want it to stop. And then it just happens. It just happens again. So this isn't a character flaw. This isn't you being broken. It's what happens when a pattern has been running long enough to become automatic. The brain is extraordinarily efficient. It will streamline any repeated behavior into something that happens without much conscious involvement. Think about driving to a place you drive to all the time, brushing your teeth, putting your shoes on. This autopilot, it's not weakness. It is wiring that's been in place for a long time. It is your brain trying to be efficient. So if you're a person who's like, I just know that I eat a lot, I don't really know. I don't know why. I don't know what happens. I don't even have any awareness, any sense of what's going on. That is autopilot. That is a phase. Okay, next phase, awareness. Here, the lights begin to come on. This is often the first real shift, not necessarily in behavior, but in visibility. So you start to notice more. You start to notice what's happening before. Maybe there's a feeling. Maybe it's a thought. Maybe it's a situation that just shows up often in the lead up to a binge. Maybe you start to notice what happens after. The specific shape of the shame, the way you talk to yourself, the promises you make. You start to notice the pattern in a way you couldn't before. Now, this phase can actually feel harder in some ways than autopilot, because now you can see it happening and you still can't stop it. And that's really disorienting. This is where it's like, oh, why do I keep doing this? I know better, but I can't do better. This feels like Groundhog's Day all over again. I had these grand plans of how today was going to be different, and it wasn't. There I went. Same pattern, same thought process. I said the same thing to myself. I said the same thing to convince myself to eat. I said the same thing afterwards. I'm saying the same thing when I put my head on the pillow, saying the same thing when I get up in the morning. And it can feel like awareness actually made things worse because now you have so much awareness where before, you knew you didn't really like it, but you know you can see more, but it didn't make it worse. Awareness is the beginning of everything. You cannot change what you cannot see, and now you're starting to see. So awareness is a phase. Now, the next phase is the space. So you may be familiar with Viktor Frankl's quote from Man's Search for Meaning, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. I love this quote so much because it really clarifies the space. When we can create that space, we get our power to choose. We go from compulsion to choice. And in our response, when we do get to choose, that's where growth and freedom lie. It is such a beautiful quote. And this phase of finding any amount of space is about that space beginning to exist. So before, there was no gap between the urge, the desire, the craving, and the action. The pattern just ran. You thought about food and you just straight to the pantry, straight to the store, straight to what your delivery app, whatever it is for you. There was no gap before. The pattern just ran. And now, in this phase, very slowly, a pause starts to appear. A moment where a question arises. What's happening right now? What do I actually need? And sometimes the answer to those questions, it's still, I don't care. I'm doing it anyway. Sometimes it's, I'll deal with this tomorrow. And that's okay. The point isn't that the question produces the right answer every time, or that we ask some amazing question and then all of a sudden we never respond with food again. The point here is that the question is being asked. The space is there. Because that space is where your freedom is going to live. Hey, quick pause to let you know that enrollment for my group coaching program, Cultivate, is open right now. Cultivate is where the work we talk about on this podcast actually happens. Over time, with support of people who understand the struggle. You become calm, connected, and confident with food in a way that feels nourishing, supportive, and sustainable. Doors close April 27th. Learn more at janepilger.com/cultivate. All right, let's go back to the episode. Okay, next phase, the recalibration. So this is the phase that is often the most understood, and it is the most common place that people exit the journey before they need to. And this is exactly the phase that the Cultivate member I mentioned at the start of this episode is in right now. She stopped restricting. Her binging reduced significantly. And yet, she is still overeating fairly frequently. And without the restriction to compensate, her body is responding in ways that feel alarming. She can see the changes and she doesn't know if they mean she's failing or if this is a part of the process. It's part of the process. And here's why. When you stop restricting, the pendulum stops swinging. So for years, decades, many people's bodies have been managing the rhythm of excess and then limitation, overeating and then cutting back, binging and then restricting. And the body adjusts to that rhythm. It learns it. When the restriction stops and when you commit to not going back to that compensating swing, the body has to find a new equilibrium. And that takes time. And while it's happening, things may look different than you expected. But here's what I want you to understand about this phase that goes beyond just the pendulum slowing down. The recalibration is not only physical, it's relational. For most people who have struggled with binge eating, the body has been an adversary for a really long time. Something to control, to change, to manage, to fight against. And the recalibration phase is the beginning of something different. The first steps towards seeing your body as a partner rather than an opponent, working with it instead of against it. And that shift in relationship does not happen all at once. But it starts here in this uncomfortable in-between when you stop trying to override what your body is doing and start getting curious about it instead. This is also where trust, self-trust is getting built. And the body trusting that you are going to feed it on a regular and consistent basis instead of back and forth between the restricting and then the binging. Because when you compensate with that restriction, the body is going to get what it can when it can if it doesn't trust that it knows that that regular food is coming again. Now, here's what else happens. As emotional capacity grows, which it will, and that's the next phase we're going to talk about, the frequent overeating that feels so alarming right now will naturally decrease. Not because you intentionally decided to eat less, but because the underlying need that food has been meeting starts to get met in other ways. So the body recalibrates, the relationship deepens, and what felt like a loss of control gradually becomes something that feels more like trust. And right in the middle of all of this, the inner critic tends to be the loudest because it can see the changes and it knows the old solution. Just restrict. Just compensate. You've done it before. And for many people who have been in this cycle for a long time, that old solution doesn't even deliver what it once did. The brain has learned the pattern. And sometimes just the thought of cutting back is enough to intensify the urge, the desire to eat. What used to work with that restriction, that short-term diet, even temporarily may not even work the way it once did. And so what looks like a shortcut often isn't even an option anymore, even though your inner critic will tell you it is the option. So if you are in the recalibration phase right now, I want you to hear this. What you are experiencing is not a sign that the process is failing. It may be the most important phase of the entire journey. Your body is learning something new, and so are you. So please stay the course. Now, the next phase, growing emotional capacity. Now, this shift is quieter sometimes than the others, and sometimes people don't really even notice it until they look back, but it is truly foundational. Food has been doing a job. For most people who struggle with binge eating, food has been a way to manage difficult feelings, to numb them, to escape them, to turn down the volume when the internal noise gets too loud. It was not a bad strategy. It worked at a cost. And as this work deepens, something else begins to grow. The capacity to be with the feeling without immediately needing to escape it. Not because the feelings get easier, but because you get more resourced. You have more tools, more awareness, more experience of surviving the feeling and coming out the other side. The nervous system begins to learn that difficult emotions are not emergencies, that they pass, that you can tolerate them. This is the rewiring in its most essential form. Food becomes less necessary as a coping strategy, not because you decided it was, but because your system has genuinely developed other capacity. Now, this does not happen overnight, but it does happen. The next phase, the self-talk shift. This is another quiet one. The inner voice starts to change. Not all at once, not permanently, and not without regression. But gradually, the voice after a hard day becomes less of an attack and more of a question. Less of, what's wrong with you? Why do you keep doing this? And more of, what happened today? What was that about? Less, what's wrong with me? More, I wonder what I needed. You might catch yourself one day responding to a difficult moment with a kindness that you didn't used to have access to. And that is no small thing. That is evidence of real change in how you relate to yourself. And how you relate to yourself is the foundation of everything. I can think back to so many times in the past where, let's say I would make a mistake. I would make a mistake at work. I would send out bad information. And the negative self-talk I would have about that was so harsh. And now I still make mistakes, to be sure. But the way I respond to myself when that happens is so different. So that's another phase, the self-talk shift. Another phase, the gap problem. So in this phase, progress is real. The data's there. We may be having fewer binges, better mornings, a different quality of relationship with food. And yet, the focus keeps landing on how far there still is to go, rather than how far you have come. The distance already traveled is invisible, but the destination where you want to go still seems so impossibly far away. Now, this is a really kind of a dangerous phase, and it's not because anything is going wrong, but it's because this is where impatience can take over, where the question, is this even working, gets loudest, where the diet world, with its clear metrics and fast results, starts to look appealing again, where someone might quietly download an app or sign up for a program that promises what this work cannot promise: fast, visible, and measurable change. And I understand that pull completely. And if you feel it, of course you do. It makes total sense. But I also want you to name it for what it is: the pendulum. And here's the thing worth knowing. I mentioned it before, but I'm going to mention it again because it's so prevalent. For people who have been in this cycle for a long time, the pendulum doesn't even deliver what it used to. The brain has learned the pattern. It senses restriction coming. It says, never again will you starve me. Never again will we do that ridiculous nonsense. And sometimes just the thought of cutting back is enough, and it responds by intensifying the desire to eat. And the swing gets harder in anticipation. So what used to work just doesn't even work the way it did. And this is a real problem. So when you are there in the gap problem, the most useful practice is not to try harder. It's to look back, specifically and intentionally. What was a hard day like in the very recent past? What did you say to yourself after a binge a few months ago? What did your relationship with food feel like when all of this started, when you started your journey? The evidence of how far you've come is there. It just requires a different kind of looking. Because when you're focused on how far you have to go and you're so tempted to go back to what your brain thinks worked, which was diet, which was restriction, you get right back on that pendulum. You have to notice it and to name it, or that temptation to just keep going back will just keep you on that cycle. All right, next phase is the untethering. Now, this one can be really interesting because when food has been the organizing structure of so much of your life, the mental real estate, the planning, the worrying, the negotiating, the aftermath, the shame, the judgment. When food starts to take up less space, something unexpected can happen here. It can feel kind of disorienting, almost like something is missing. Like you don't know what to do with the quiet, with all of this space that used to be taken up with obsession around food or your body. Now, this isn't a sign that something is wrong. It's one of the kind of more unique and less talked about signs that something is actually working. When food is no longer running the show, there is space. And filling that space with the rest of your life takes time. It takes time to figure out what you want to fill it with, because your brain wants to just go back to what it knows. That space can feel disorienting. It can feel uncomfortable before it is freeing. But it does become freeing because now you get to choose. Remember that Viktor Frankl quote about space? And in the space, we have the power to choose. And that's where our growth and our freedom lie. We get more space when we're not so focused on food all of the time. Then we get to choose, what do I want to fill my life with? If it is no longer going to be all about what I did eat, what I'm going to eat, how much I weigh, what clothes are in my closet, which ones I can wear, which ones I can't wear. If it is no longer about all of that, what do I want to fill that with? And yeah, it can be a little disorienting, and then it can truly create the life you actually want for yourself. So another phase, when the weight starts to lift. So I'm going to come back to where this episode started. That message from the Cultivate member who is deep in the recalibration phase. She feels genuinely better in real, measurable ways, and she's still struggling in others, wanting to know, is this normal? What does this process actually look like? Here's what I love. She got part of her answer from someone she didn't have to seek out. So inside Cultivate, members have the option to be paired with a support sister so that people doing this work have someone to share the experience with, someone who truly gets it. So her support sister has been in this work for a couple of years now. She has come through her own recalibration. And in their conversation, she was able to say, I know this place. I've been there. And here's what happened for me. So this is what the phase can look like when you have the right support around you. And what her support sister was describing, what people who've been doing this work for a while often find themselves saying, is that something shifted that is hard to fully describe until you feel it. So the best way I can put it is like a weight has been lifted. And these are like direct words I have heard so many clients say. It's not just a physical weight. And for some people, that does change, but it's not the point. The more significant weight is the mental one. The constant preoccupation with food, the planning, the negotiating, the worry, the aftermath, the way food used to occupy so much space in the mind. That weight becomes lighter. And when it lifts, there is a sense of freedom that is genuinely different from anything a diet ever produced, because this freedom wasn't achieved by gripping tighter. It actually came when the grip loosens. This is not a finish line. There is no moment where you cross over and declare yourself done. It is more like gradually realizing you are standing somewhere different than you used to be. Food is just food. Hard days still happen, but the spiral doesn't run the same way it used to. You can be in your body more. You trust it more. Where there was a feeling of being trapped in the cycle, in the shame, in the constant effort of managing it all, there is now more room, more ease, more of your own life available to you. And that is what you're moving toward. And it is worth every phase that it takes to get there. And then we have the final phase of attunement. This is the place that the journey is really leading toward, even if it's hard to imagine from the middle of it. So attunement, it's beyond awareness. Awareness is noticing what's happening. Attunement is truly tuning in, knowing what you need in any given moment and trusting that knowledge. It's hearing your hunger and your satiety and responding to them with confidence, with connection, rather than with suspicion or control or uncertainty. But it goes so far beyond food. Attunement is knowing when your body needs rest and honoring that rather than pushing past it. It's feeling when you've hit a limit in conversation, in a relationship, in a situation, and not overriding it. It's noticing when something isn't right for you anymore, even when you can't fully explain why, and trusting that signal. The energy behind this is not vigilance or monitoring or self-discipline or control. It's caring. It is the same gentle, curious attention you might offer someone you truly love, turned inward, toward yourself. Not judgment, not rigidity, not control, just a warm and honest listening. And as the work deepens, that loud signal becomes less necessary because you're tuned in. You are already listening. And this is not a firm destination, a place where you arrive. Your body changes. Your life changes. What you need at 40, it's not what you needed at 30. Same with any decade. And what you need in a season of stress is not what you need in a season of ease. Attunement is not a fixed state you achieve. It is a way of moving through your life, in relationship with yourself, adapting and adjusting as you go, not white-knuckling or overriding or waiting until you've earned the right to rest, just listening and responding and trusting that you know. And that is what this journey is building toward. And it is worth every phase that it takes to get there. So now let's talk a little bit about why so many people don't complete this journey. They get impatient, right? We're culturally conditioned to expect fast results. A program that works should show results in weeks. And if it's taking longer than that, something must be wrong with the approach or with you. And that conditioning is everywhere. And it's reinforced every time you see a before and after, Every time a diet promises results in 30 days, every time quick feels like the standard. But what you are doing here is not a diet. It is not a program with a 6-week timeline. It is the rewiring of patterns that have been in place for years and sometimes decades. It is building a new relationship with yourself, with your body, your emotions, your inner world that is stable enough to hold you when things get hard. That takes longer than 30 days. It takes longer than most people want it to. And the fact that it takes longer is not evidence that it's not working. It's actually evidence that what you are building is real, sustainable, long-term change. So I'm going to close with something really brief, and this deserves its entire own conversation. And next week on the podcast, it's going to get one. What those two Cultivate members have, that ability to share the experience with someone who truly understands it, who is in the same work, at a different phase of the same journey, is not something that happens by accident. It is built intentionally. And there's something about being known in that specific way by someone who gets this particular struggle from the inside that changes the experience of it. Shame wants us to do this alone. And next week on the podcast, I am going to talk about why that is and what becomes possible when we don't do this alone. Now, if you'd like to learn more about Cultivate and the work that I do, you can find everything at janepilger.com. If you happen to be listening to this when it airs live, Cultivate is open right now. It's only open a couple of times a year. So if this sounds like something you might want to explore for yourself, please check it out. There will be a link in the show notes. But before you go, I want to leave you something to sit with. Take a moment and think about where you are on this map. Not where you wish you were, not where you think you should be, but where you actually are right now. Identify the phase or phases where you see yourself. And just ask, what is one step that I can take toward becoming the eater I want to be? Not a huge overhaul, not some big old plan, one step. One small movement in the direction of who you are becoming. And that is how this journey is made. One small step at a time. That's what I have for you today. I'll see you next week. If what you heard today resonates with you, if you're ready to stop fighting and start building a different relationship with food and with yourself, Cultivate is where that work happens. Cultivate is my ongoing group coaching program, and it's where everything I teach here on the podcast goes deeper over time. You learn your nervous system. You understand what's driving the urges and how to respond to them. And the binges don't go away because you finally defeated them. They go away because the battle ends. Learn more and find out if it's a fit at janepilger.com/cultivate.